Bashar al-Assad there, the battle for Idlib continues. Now, according to the latest figures by United Nations, over 900,000 Syrians, mostly children and women, have been displaced since December in northwest Syria, where this offensive is taking place. More than 40,000 have been displaced in the last 4 days alone from western Aleppo province. What is the future of the Idlib offensive? Let's find out from our guests. We are joined today by Mr. Can Hassasou, journalist, and also the output manager at TRT Arabic. He's joining us today from Istanbul. We also have with us Mr. Fadel Abdul Ghany, an analyst joining us from London. Welcome to both of you to Newswire. Where exactly are we when it comes to Russian and Turkish delegations? They've been discussing the tense situation in Idlib. Mr. Hassasou, your comments beginning the show with, are they going anywhere?
Turkish foreign ministry is built on really trying everything in the diplomacy side in these kind of cases. We remember the disagreements between the US and Turkey about the YPG presence in Syria. Turkey tried to really do its best to solve the problem in diplomatic ways, but when it understood that the US authorities are not really replying, they acted on the field, and that made the US authorities to come a deal with the Turkish officials. Now Turkey is using the same tactic with Russia. They don't want to lose an ally in the region. They are dealing with this delegate matter very sensitively, and the Turkish delegation in Moscow, which headed by the Deputy Foreign Minister Sedat Önal, is trying to do its best with the intelligence officers and the army officials with him in Moscow to find a solution to this problem. And I think Turkey is going to do its best to understand if there is anything left to do diplomatically to solve it. Then the field could be another option for Turkey.
Mr. Ghany, as Mr. Hassasou said, he continues to push the political mandate that this should be resolved politically, de-escalation should take place. But let's face it, those peace accords, those agreements back in September 2018 between Turkey and Russia, which talked about this very de-escalation to avoid this very situation where hundreds of thousands of civilians are the ones who are paying the price as the Syrian regime advances. It seems like that all those peace deals are essentially dead.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that the comparison between the Russian and the United States is unfair, actually. Russia is an unreliable party which has committed hundreds of war crimes against Syrian. Russia cannot be trusted, and we test Russian. We test the Russian in Dar'a, in Eastern Ghouta. They seized Eastern Ghouta, then Dar'a, then north of Homs. They support totally Assad against every side, actually, especially in the United Nations via 13 veto, via also supporting against any ties.
Mr. Hassasou, Russians cannot be trusted, as Mr. Ghany said. I mean, just talking about the current situation, more than 1,800 civilians have died. 1,800 Syrians have been killed by regime forces, Russian forces, since the beginning of this so-called 2018 ceasefire. And especially, let's not forget what was decided on January 12th and how the offensive started. Do you also subscribe to the opinion that Russians aren't really the most reliable ally here?
Well, from the Turkish perspective, Turkish officials don't rely on any of these parties. They are trying to make fair and transparent agreements with them to address these kind of problems, especially in Syria. But if they don't really meet these agreements, they act on the field. So, I mean, we were not really comparing US to Russia, but the Turkish diplomacy style in the region in case of dealing with this kind of problems. And in the recent days, the indiscriminate bombardment from the regime and the Russian air forces in Idlib area towards the civilian population shows that they are using the civilians or the migration of these civilians as a tool of saying to the West that they will continue to act so to bomb these areas to scare the other controlling powers in the region. But as you may know, there were attacks targeting Turkish soldiers in the region, and the President
13 were killed
has
just
warned
in a span of 1 month. But I want to interject here, because you keep saying that if they do not follow the agreements that have taken place for de-escalation, the thing is, when Russia backs the Syrian regime with air power, continues to kill civilians in Aleppo, and as Bashar al-Assad said, that while they've taken this over, this is not the end, that they will continue fighting. It seems like they sign off on whatever agreement there was, and they haven't been following and don't plan to.
Yes, and this is the core of the problem. And Turkey is trying to find a way out of this this serious problem, because they signed another thing on the table, and now Russia is acting differently and pushing Turkey really on a corner, which will make it uncomfortable against all the Syrians who are immigrant Syrians who are living in Turkey, the opposition, and the Europeans as well.
Right. Now, I hear you on that front, pushing Turkey in a corner while Turkey continues to try and find some breakthrough through diplomacy. But then what we're hearing from the Turkish foreign minister, that if necessary, we will take other steps. What other steps is he alluding to?
The necessary steps, even if in the expense of really damaging some other relations between Russia and Turkey. Because the story is not all about Idlib only. This is about the region and the future of the region. So Turkey really tries to, I think, to give the message to Russia that they are ready to do what they did with the U.S., according to what they did against the YPG group inside Syria. So Turkey is ready, actually, and they are determined to do what they said. But before that, Turkey is warning that this could change the matter in a way that they can't really go back and fix it again. So they are making sure that the other side is really getting the message, and they are not bluffing, and they are really determined to do what they are saying. So, but at the same time, Turkey is on the field, and it's neighboring to Syria. Russia has the air power, but it doesn't have the main manpower on the ground. Iran does, but not a big manpower, and it's actually weakened by the economical and political environment in the region. So everyone has advantages and disadvantages in this case, and we, I think, have to wait and see what's going to happen at the end of these meetings that comes up.
Okay, so we have to see what happens at the end of these meetings. But meanwhile, Syrian forces seem to be, and here I refer to what Bashar al-Assad said in the soundbite that you just heard, Mr. Ghany, when he talks about that this is an ongoing battle, but he also says it certainly means rubbing their noses in the dirt as a prelude for complete defeat sooner or later. Is this a victory? Do you see it as a victory for Bashar al-Assad, what has happened in Aleppo?
I don't think that this is the victory. And this is victory of the Russian forces, actually. And this is a major power in the world. We are not, like the Syrian population is not only against Bashar al-Assad, against the Iranian militia, and against the Russian folks of airplanes, which is like targeting mainly the civilians, and that lead to these waves of displacement. So based on that, Bashar al-Assad is just a pawn in the Russia hand, actually. And we cannot like segregate between the Russian and Bashar al-Assad. It's very much difficult, actually. And I think that the goal of the Russian is to seize all the territory, to avoid any types of accountability, because the Russian is committed hundreds of crimes against humanity and war crimes in Syria. Also Bashar al-Assad, we are unable to like overcome that Bashar al-Assad is alleged criminal, because he is the lead of the Syria army, and Syria army is accused by several bodies in the United Nations by accusing crimes against humanity and war crimes. So that lead us how they overcome this dilemma by seizing all the territory and reach to settlement that remove these crimes and then reach to impunity by maybe mutual government or something like this. Russia will never let Bashar al-Assad alone. They will continue seizing more territory, and they will continue to pressure the Turkish government as well. Thousands of thousands now gathered on the Turkish border, and then there is a humanitarian crisis taking place on those borders, and then pressurize the Russian government to open the border. And already
they're pressuring the Turkish forces. You're talking thousands that have gathered on the borders there with Syria. In fact, by one account, 700,000 more Syrians are making it to the border to seek asylum, to seek refuge in Turkey. The big problem for Turkey there, Mr. Hassasu, the US President Donald Trump also called Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and said, and thanked him and said that, thank you for preventing a humanitarian catastrophe in northwestern Syria. Tell me, the 18,000 that have been killed so far, what is President Trump considering them as collateral damage?
Well, of course. I mean, the whole Syrian civil war is a shame in the history of the West, both the Europeans and the Americans. They didn't really did their best to prevent what happened in Syria and what continues to happen. So all these, especially in Turkey, considered as only words. They have no weight on the field. International community has gave up on the civilians and their demands. And there are more than 3 million people living in Idlib area only. And these people are insisting to live in their own country. But unfortunately, the situation is forcing them to act otherwise. And we don't know. I mean, Turkey will continue to see their needs. And if needed, of course, it will open the doors for these people. But under these circumstances, they are trying to keep them there, convincing them that they are still safe or there are still safe areas. But this bombardment, actually, that takes place, especially within the last couple of months, is proving otherwise, and it's not giving any other chance to most of the families who are trying to found a shelter for their children and family.
Mr. Can Hassasu joining us, Istanbul. Thank you so much for your opinion there. Coming back to you, Mr. Abdul Ghany, some analysts believe that Turkey wants its military presence in Syria, in Idlib especially, so to, in future, extract concessions from the regime. But the way things are going on the ground, with the regime continuing to take back rebel-held areas that have been held by rebels backed by Turkey, seems that Turkey's leverage is significantly reduced.
Indeed, actually, and they are talking about Adana Agreement, which is talking about 13 kilometers, but now we notice that Assad seizing territory and area which is approximately 15 kilometers and 20 kilometers from the Turkish border. So even Adana is now being violated. And Assad will seize, as I mentioned, with the Russian, will continue with this threatening. For example, I'm giving you from what's going on past couple of days. Assad is shelling Idlib. Assad is shelling and Al-Atarib, which is very, very close to the border, and which is far also from where is the clashes or the border between Assad army and the opposition. So he's targeting and shelling areas which is inside the opposition area. That means he is intended to seize and to reach to those areas and want the people there not to feel settled and not to be comfortable, and also to displace and push them toward more north and toward further camps on the border. This is the Assad strategy, and I think that the Russian is totally support him, and I think that at this stage they might be ceasefire, but to acknowledge what's the advance on the ground, and maybe after a few months again we have other campaign and seizing more territories, and that's what's been done. We remember that we've been together in Khan Sheikhoun. Before Ma'arat al-Nu'man, Khan Sheikhoun been seized a couple months ago, and now at this past months, Ma'arat al-Nu'man being seized. After maybe few months, we'll notice that Idlib being seized. This is very clear, and I think that anyone being fooled by Russian is, I think this is like out of expectation, because the Russian exists in Syria for decisive winning.
Okay, Mr. Fadel Abdul Ghany.